Men lie, women lie, but these numbers for sure don't. Characterized by dazzling outfits sizzling from head to toe, being D1 level posh, and for lack of a better phrase, being unapologetically cunty. These colorful numbers have danced their way into our hearts and kept us entertained for the better part of a century, so much that at the height of their prowess they were basically money-printing machines for studios. But as it is with time, what was once considered yesterday's it factor is not considered the same as the one for today, and sadly for musicals they were not exemplary to this fact. But similar to fashion, the musical style is eternal, and has always had a light at the end of the tunnel. So, after years of that light being dim, a sort of resurgence has occurred, and that light has only gotten brighter with time and introduction of new audiences. So as we try to do what little part we have in trying to rekindle that light, the Audience Chair presents to you a segment on the evolution of the movie musicals throughout the years. So take this as your chance to take off those high heels and strap up some flat bottoms, because honey, you are about to rise up and dance, but before you do so, kindly subscribe to our YouTube channel as a show of support and to also ensure that you don't miss out on any of our movie-related videos. Now, back to the music.
Showtime, folks.
To officially kick off this segment, allow us to take you back to 1927, where a bankrupt Warner Brothers bet on synchronizing sound with motion pictures had just paid off in the form of the success of The Jazz Singer. Featuring a rather racist plot that, thank Christ Almighty, hasn't stood the test of time, the part-time talkie features a plethora of scenes where the character Jackie Robinowitz performs a couple of numbers that could actually be heard.
As can be, making noise, breaking toys.
While lip-singing to synchronized vocal tracks, Al Jolson and Alan Crosland introduced the concept of sound in film, in no other form but music, and a couple of ad-lib dialogue.
Wait a minute, you ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you ain't heard nothing.
To no one's surprise but studio heads, the movie was a smash hit with audiences and would become the highest-grossing movie of its time. Naturally, as it is with the nature of business, studios would try to emulate the success by producing more forgettable talkie musicals that incorporated the same technique as The Jazz Singer. Audiences seemingly couldn't get enough of them, and this would lead to an oversaturation of these movies, and that was when audiences finally had their fill. Tired of being dished out the same film in just a different plating, audiences started to care less about the musicals, and for a brief moment it seemed that the musicals wouldn't live to see the 30s. But as it is with any dish, there was someone out there still trying to perfect the musical recipe. Now all the way over at MGM, the boy wonder producer Irving Thalberg, well known for his innovative approach to pictures as more of an art form than rather a business, was hard at work trying to get his musical The Broadway Melody off the ground. True to his stats and nickname, Thalberg wanted to separate his musicals from the rest by striving to exceed the niche position other musicals at that time strived to reach. One of the ways he made sure of this was by aligning himself with different creatives of the various key aspects of the musical genre. One of the creatives was a duo of lyricist Arthur Freed and musician Nazio Herb Brown, and the other was the sound designer Douglas Shearer. The music duo would have Brown first come up with the music, then Freed would later on write the lyrics, and together they wrote some of the best music featured throughout the films, such as The Wedding of the Painted Doll and You Were Meant for Me, with the latter even been preserved in American history and performed by various stars of all ages such as Gene Kelly. But even with the groundbreaking music, the real secret sauce was the brother-in-law to Irving Thalberg, who was Douglas Shearer. Shearer came up with the idea of filming and recording the songs separately, thus allowing dancers to move freely during choreographed sequences without any worry of loss of breath, as they were just lip-syncing to their pre-recorded vocals. Even though the movie released to critical and commercial success in 1929, it has since then aged very poorly as audiences and critics today continuously butcher it in every way possible. But what they forget to take into consideration is that without Thalberg's innovative approach to this picture, with standards and new techniques that redefine the musical genre, masterwork classics such as Gold Diggers of 1933, Footlight Parade, The Merry Window, Love Me Tonight, and Dames might not have seen the light of day. Even though Thalberg wouldn't be around long enough to see it, MGM would go full throttle on trying to elevate the musical genre by constantly pumping them out. During the entire production of these musicals, Arthur Freed would still continue to work for MGM as a lyricist, but kudos to him for not confining himself to that position, as he would constantly be on sets trying to learn everything he could about filmmaking. So, after years of soaking all that knowledge up, he finally felt that he had a little bit of hair on his nuts to finally approach the volatile Louis B. Mayer for a more lucrative position that would enable him to fully unleash his talents. Considering the hot-headed reputation of Louis B. Mayer, this move alone would prove Freed's level of ambition. But unfortunately, having a set of balls on him the size of a whale wasn't enough. Mayer would instead offer him an associate producer credit on whatever film he first brought to the studio, and kudos to him again for already having one in mind. Freed brought Mayer a copy of a little novel by Frank Baum, known as The Wizard of Oz, with the hopes of adapting it to a musical. Mayer, though not immediately, was sold, and as soon as the necessary arrangements were made, MGM would begin production of the 1939 Technicolor classic, The Wizard of Oz. Even though he didn't get the lucrative promotion he had in mind, the little associate producer credit was still a win to him, and didn't even nudge his level of enthusiasm for the film. Throughout its production, Freed was heavily involved in major aspects of the film, such as pushing Judy Garland for the lead role of Dorothy and other details that truly brought to life the magic of the story. Though the movie wasn't a hit in theaters, critics saw the potential of the film and were instantly mesmerized by it. Finally, this was enough for the studios to fully put their trust in Freed, and would even commission a third musical unit solely under Freed. Now, before we go any further into the Freed unit, we'd like to inform you that this particular video practices the controversial notion of separating the art from the artist, and we won't go into any details about how Freed was undoubtedly one of the pieces of shit plaguing cinema. For that topic, we are going to dedicate a whole video with the sole purpose of exposing the freaks like him in Hollywood posing as human beings. And so with that, back to the art perspective. After being commissioned a whole unit under him, Freed would go straight to work producing a string of successful backyard musicals such as Babes in Arms, Strike Up the Band, and Girl Crazy. Now, for further context, the backyard musicals are typically the musicals that came out emulating the formula of Thalberg's Broadway melody. These backyard musicals, or diegetic musicals, feature the numbers being a part of the plot and are performed in realistic situations and settings, such as a performance on stage or during a Broadway production. Contrary to these musicals are the integrated musicals or non-diegetic musicals. They, on the other hand, feature musical numbers being performed in unrealistic situations, like for instance, when characters are mid-dialogue and all of a sudden, they break into song and dance.
Few modern males who can measure up to the prehistoric. Modern man is not for me.
The latter musicals allow the music to further the plot, and even allow stars to stretch out their artistic prowess. And after years of playing it safe with the backyard musicals, Freed was ready to make the necessary change. So after the success of the aforementioned backyards, MGM would give the Freed unit more freedom to experiment, and Freed put it to use almost immediately. He would inherit the genius of his initial boss of having a keen eye for talent, and would gather talent from all over the country to be part of the Freed unit. Broadway talent like Broadway director Vincente Minnelli and songwriter Roger Eden were brought on. Careers of many stars like Judy Garland, Fred Astaire were nurtured by the man, and he would even encourage Gene Kelly to step out of his comfort zone to stretch out his artistic limits. With all these people and many more, the Freed unit was formed, and they got to work on producing a number of integrated classics, first of which was Meet Me in St. Louis. This catapulted them to great heights and allowed for greater freedom and production of more musicals of its kind, such as On the Town, Showboat, An American in Paris, and a little film called Singing in the Rain. They would ride this high wave all the way into the 50s, but sadly, not everything good lasts forever. Even though they were coined as the studio with more stars than there are in heaven, by the time the 50s were rolling in, these stars would start to twinkle a bit less than before, and by the time the decade was coming to an end, these stars were long gone. But at least they did so in a bang, which was in the form of the 1958 musical classic Gigi. In the 60s, the MGM as they knew it was gone, but this didn't mean the same for musicals. No, it was far from that, as other studios and creatives already had plans in motion that would see the next evolution of the musical genre. This next step was bringing Broadway to Hollywood. To paint a clear picture on why they opted to do this, we first have to understand why musicals on Broadway were such a hit. And this can all be traced back and credited to the partnership of musical theater savants, Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein II. When these two came together to write a theater musical based on the play Green Grow the Lilacs, they quickly realized that they had to abandon the common system of basing the lyrics around the music if they truly wanted to do this emotional play justice. They realized the lyrics were needed to be composed first in order to push the narrative and also create the music. Contrary to the initial system of all musicals alike, the duo would have Hammerstein first write the lyrics and Rodgers would later on compose the music based off these lyrics. The results were successful as the numbers would push the play's narrative. They released the play in theaters under the title Oklahoma, and it went on to be a smash hit amongst the audience. As the positive response to the play would spread, more and more people would flock the theaters to see it, causing the play to break records as it ran for an unprecedented total of 2,212 performances throughout the years 1943 to 1948. Thanks to this reverse take on the popular formula, it became evident that both the lyrics and music are keen to propel any given narrative and served as a stepping stone to all musical theater productions from then on. Musical theater was now a smashing success, and it didn't take long enough for Hollywood to catch wind of this. Virtually every musical film throughout the 60s, like West Side Story, The Sound of Music, and My Fair Lady, were all Broadway adaptations, and those that weren't, like Mary Poppins, still used the Hammerstein-Rodgers method to come up with their musical numbers. Now the 60s also saw production of what I personally consider to be the greatest musical of all time, and one that would introduce Western audiences to overseas classics and directors. Of course, I'm talking about the 1964 gut-wrenching but visually stunning Jacques Demy masterpiece, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg. The perfect way to sum up the film is that it is a musical's musical. The story, the performances, the use of color, and the dialogue that is entirely sung throughout the film feels like an opera presented to us in glorious 35mm Technicolor, and it can't help but induce a tear to even the most emotionally absent human being there is. Apologies if we got carried away, but the film is that good, or heartbreaking depending on what perspective you view it from. The film also introduced Western audiences to overseas directors like Jacques Demy and his other masterworks, such as The Young Girls of Rochefort and Lola, which, as he described, is a musical without the music. This stunning work of art also inspired other directors and films that we are going to see as we move forward and back to Hollywood. Now back over to Hollywood. Even though musicals had found success with the aforementioned films at the start of the 60s, by the end of it, that favor seemingly wasn't by their side. Part of the blame was due to the poor adaptation of successful Broadway material to screen. But the major factor could be attributed to the emergence of a new audience. An audience that was young, wild, and rebellious. An audience that viewed life from its gritty point of view and understood that life wasn't always centered around happy moments of song and dance, and they demanded that their cinema reflect that. So naturally, as it is with business, studios started to cater for the wider demographic, and this would serve as the final and most crucial blow to the musical genre. Any musicals released in the 70s moving on forward were met with both critical and commercial failure, but some musicals still found some sort of success. But this was mainly because they still catered to this young audience through various storytelling techniques, such as themes and genres that were relatable with them. Take, for instance, the works of the legendary Bob Fosse during this decade. His 1972 film Cabaret tackles some serious issues on fascism, and was even able to go toe-to-toe with serious contenders at the Oscars like The Godfather. Or his 1979 magnum opus, All That Jazz, where he comes to accept the inevitability of death through his fictional self-inspired character of Joe Gideon. Genre-blending musicals with other movie genres big with the core audience also worked to a great extent. Take, for instance, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, featuring a fierce Tim Curry as a transvestite alien that was not afraid to show it. Or De Palma's Phantom of Paradise that could easily be summed up as a revenge horror musical. The point we are trying to make is that the days of the epic set, full-blown musicals were over. but not totally, as they still found success only in the animation department, and the best to ever do it was hands down Disney. Things like The Lion King, Aladdin, and The Little Mermaid would find success, but only as family musicals, and this would cement the fate and position of the musical for the remainder of that century. Now fast forward to the 21st century and the musicals are still in the dog pound. But there have been bright moments in film that have slightly increased the chances of musicals breaking out of there. This can again be credited to a whole generation of audiences being raised and taught by animated musicals. Take, for instance, when they were young kids and still innocent. The Disney animated musicals like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast taught them about love, coming of age, and the difference between right and wrong, and when they went through puberty and didn't have the right words to express themselves. South Park, bigger, longer, and uncut, put the right, or rather wrong, words in their mouth and gave them a little taste of the real world in no other form but music. So coming into the 21st century, studios would start to gamble the musical chances with these audiences by opting to produce more live-action musicals, and after a string of unsuccessful ones, they finally struck gold with Baz Luhrmann's 2001 film Moulin Rouge and Rob Marshall's film adaptation of Chicago in 2002. Everything about these two musicals, from the story, costumes to the choreography, echoes of the golden age of this genre, with the latter being at the top of their game. But sadly, after a couple of many good and enjoyable but not great musicals, it seemed no other production would reach the feat achieved by the aforementioned two films. That's when 2016 rolled in and a young director oozing of passion and talent released his second feature-length film titled La La Land. We could go on and on about this film, but the overall point would be the care and passion that went into the making of this film revitalized the musical genre to an extent that eventually sparked up an interest in the whole genre again. Though a couple of thorough fuck-ups, namely Cats, have threatened the interest and future set forward by La La Land, other musicals have still tried their best in pushing and ensuring the preservation of this genre. So, with two musicals slated for a later release this year, with one even being a first-time genre blending of the musical with the box office favorite superhero genre, will the musicals finally break out of that infamous movie jail that had its bars initially weakened by La La Land? For that answer, I guess you have to hit that subscribe button and stick around with us to find out.